Hey guys, and welcome to the Master Beginners course to SEO. My name is Rodrigo. When I created this course, I really wanted to create something really in depth that would guide you through not just search engines, what they are, and how the practice of SEO came to be, but also I wanted to create something that would explain what were all the kind of components that went into this practice. A lot of people are coming into SEO today for the very first time, no background, no history into it, and really want to understand it. Now they're coming into it as a practice or work that they're beginning to do. Other folks are beginning to just hear about it, and it's beginning to play an effect into the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So wherever, and there's many more spectrums as to why you're here and into why you're getting this information today. But two main things for creating this is one, I wanted to put it out there and make it free for everyone. I hope you enjoy it. Please leave me feedback. I'd love to make this to your standards and how you would ideally benefit from this. So if it's incomplete or if there's something missing, please let me know. Second is I wanted to create as much detail as possible. So we have quite a bit to go through today. So I'm excited. I hope you'll have a big cup of coffee or a tea, whatever you drink, and sit back and relax. So I try to make this as kind of tolerable as possible because there is quite a bit of information to go through in this short amount of time. So I do want to start with search engines. Now you can find a lot of information on Wikipedia and online into how Gopher and some of these older search engines came to be, even all the way back to how the internet was created with, just go online. You'll find the back context to this. But what I want to talk about is the search engines that we really work with on a day-to-day basis in the world of SEO. Now, there's four fish here. Now, naturally, Google is the largest of the four fish, and that's where the majority of the market share. More people search on Google than any other search engine. Now, Yandex in Russia and Baidu in China and other places in Asia, they certainly have their large market share. But from a global standpoint, Google still dominates the search market. Now, we're talking about search in the sense of going into google.com, typing in a query, hitting enter, and seeing results, right? So we call this text search or query-based search. Now, there's also other search engines as well, too. Now, one thing, I'll get into that in a second, but one thing I just want to mention here is that there's this big chase that's happening between Microsoft, Yahoo, and AOL, and essentially Microsoft has won the battle of being the second largest search engine, again, text-based, query-based search engine, and Bing, or Microsoft, however you want to refer to them, really is the second largest player here. Now, a lot of these second or third tier search engines like Yahoo or AOL, a lot of their results do come from Google and Microsoft. So whenever you advertise on Google or Bing, you may see an option to advertise also on search partners, and that's essentially what it's referring to. Now, we can't ignore the fact that YouTube is the second largest search engine. A lot of people are using YouTube to search and to query videos and types of information that they're looking for, but the nature, the intent is for video content. Now, there is an audience for that, and if you're creating video and if you have content on YouTube, you certainly want to focus search engine optimization efforts around YouTube specifically. And there are things that you can do on videos in terms of titles, descriptions, keyword tags, etc., links, that will essentially optimize the video ranking in YouTube search results. So it's an important factor. Again, second largest search engine in the world, but if we're just talking about text-based search engines, you'll find as an SEO or someone that's involved with SEO that your day-to-day is mostly focused around Google. Now, Amazon and some of these social channels are also really important to keep in mind as well, because if you're an e-commerce company, you also have to remember that Amazon's positioned itself as a pretty prominent search engine where people may not go to Google to search for products and then find Amazon, but rather they'll go to Amazon directly and then search within Amazon. And same for Instagram and Facebook and some of the other social channels where people are searching for hashtags or profiles of individual people or categories of terms, like luxury goods, whatnot. And then app search is something that we also have to keep in mind, and also including the Android store, Google Play, or any of the other app-based search engines. It's really important that we keep these in mind as well too, but this really does depend on a client basis. If we're working with someone in travel, maybe YouTube and some of the social and app sites may be kind of a critical factor. If we're working with a retailer or an e-commerce company, we may more look on the side of Amazon or even YouTube if there's videos that would apply to the products. So keep these in mind. These will play an important part in your day-to-day. Now, I want to talk more specifically about the SERPs. Now, SERP stands for Search Engine Results Page, or pages, SERPs. And essentially, this is what you see when you type in a query in Google or Bing or any of the other search engines and you hit enter. Now, remember in Google, you have this I'm feeling lucky where Google will try to guess the right page and take you directly there and kind of skip over the SERP itself. But at the bottom here in the image, the bottom left and bottom right image, those are the search result pages for Google and for Bing. And what you have here is basically a mix between paid listings and organic listings, and I'll get into those in a little bit more detail. But there's also a lot of other listings as well too. There's local listings, there may be map listings, or what's called universal results. And this is a mix between various types of search results. Again, we'll go into this in more detail, but the main thing here is that this is the search result page, or the SERP, and just become familiar with that terminology, because you'll see it a lot in blog posts and videos. Now, when we're looking at the SERPs, again, SERPs here for search engine results pages, they're for desktop and mobile results. Now, tablet typically mirrors desktop results. There's three main types of search results. You have your traditional, just a list of links. You have your universal search results, which are a combination between images and videos. It could be a map listing. It could also be news. It could be social components. These are all factors into universal. Or there's now this new knowledge-based search where Google and Bing try to understand the context of what you're searching for and give you that information directly in the results. There's different types of options that you have here in the search result pages where you can filter. You can also use what's called search operators, where you can narrow down your searches or filter them. Now, one quick note here at the very top bullet point here, desktop and mobile basically refers to that there's two different types of search results, one for desktop, one for mobile. They'll normally follow pretty closely to one another, but more and more Google and Bing are moving to what's called a mobile first index, where they're showing you, unique search results per device. And what you'll see is that tablet typically follows anything that's happening on mobile. You also have a mixed results. Google will normally test in a small percentage of search results will be a test. So you may be seeing something that somebody else is not seeing, even if you're on the same device. And it could be that you're experiencing a test batch, or Google is testing something on your results. The results themselves, now I'll show you the difference between paid and organic, but if we're just talking about organic search results or natural search results, these are also called listings. So these are basically individual pages, and Google is giving you a small snippet of what that page title is in the description. Again, if you're confused, no worries. We'll go into a lot more detail with all of this. So let's talk about the search result page itself. Okay, now a couple of things to point out here is that when we're looking at search results, there's two types of components to it, essentially. Now there's a lot of different components. There's maps, images, videos, etc. But mainly speaking, you're going to have sponsored results, and you're going to have organic results. Now the sponsored links or sponsored results are essentially the advertising that you can do through Google or through Bing. In Google, it's called Google AdWords, and Bing, it's called Bing Ads. And these are placements that are basically reserved for those types of advertisers that are bidding on particular keywords, and they are showing ads for those keywords. These are mostly all on a cost per click basis, so you only pay if someone clicks on your ad, not for every time that it shows up, which is called an impression. Now the other types of, there's different ways to refer to this. There's Google AdWords, pay-per-click, PPC, SEM, etc. It's a long list of terminology, but it essentially refers to the same thing, which is the sponsored listings. Now the rest of the results on a page are typically non-paid, and they're all factored through an algorithm. And it's basically Google's intelligence system that's determining what are the best pieces of content on the entire web, or the web that Google understands through crawling, that fit that particular query. And sometimes it's just going to be a list of blue links like you can see here at the top, and sometimes it's going to be a mix between images and videos and other types of content on the listing. But they're all organic, they're all non-paid. Now in terms of terminology here, You may see this referred to as SEO. You may see it referred to as organic or natural. It's essentially all the same thing. Now, anything that's news results or image results or anything else, it's still technically organic or natural search results, but it's not just blue links. It's not links to individual pages. They may be image links, or they may be video links, or there may be a news snippet. But everything you see here in this entire section that's not sponsored is basically algorithmic, and it's brought in through Google. Okay, now Google in 2016, around February, did remove the right-hand rail. So in search results, you no longer see ads on the right-hand side. You'll just see some ads above or below the organic search results. Typically, it's about 3 above the organic search results, the first one, and then about 4 below it. And you'll see this across the board. You'll see this in Yahoo, across different countries. You'll see this in Bing. You'll see this on English or Spanish or any other type of queries. It's essentially the same thing. You have sponsored links and you have organic links or algorithmic links. So one thing you pay for, the other thing you earn your way there. Now, I refer to these as SEO here because that's essentially what SEO is. It's how do we get our web page to rank at the top of the search results for the queries that matter to our business. Now, the value of this is that there's so many people searching in Google. And second, they're searching at all times, and they're searching across a variety of different keywords. So there's all different ways to reach people across different points in the value system or different points in a marketing funnel to essentially be visible across all points, whether someone's searching for vacation or whether they're searching for a family vacation to the Caribbean in April of 2017 for toddlers, something very specific. Now, a bit of history into this. Now, the search results pages have changed quite a bit over time. Now, for the most part, traditionally speaking, search results have been a combination of essentially these titles and descriptions. Now, this is your traditional search result page that basically shows you what are the top ranking pages for that particular query. But over time, Google began to test different things. They wanted to see whether or not consumers would kind of interact differently and click on more elements or less, depending on how they would test these changes. So Google began to test a variety of things, one being site links in 2007, where Google began to test the impact that these sublinks underneath the search results would have on click-through rates. Click-through rate is basically clicks divided by impressions, which is saying what percentage of all impressions or appearances are being clicked on. And Google wanted to help users, and they wanted them to stay longer on the search results page and find exactly what they're looking for. So they provided these sublinks. Also, a quick thing on sublinks, real quick, I think it's worth noting in case we don't get to it later, is you can tell Google which pages you don't want to be site links, but you can't specifically call out which ones you do. Now, there may be some technical workarounds with HTML5 and category tagging or top-level navigation tagging, but just assume that for a general sense or general audience or set of websites, you can only kind of cancel out certain pages, not include them in crawling. Now, 2007 also marked the intro to universal search results, and this really helped change the game for search engines because Google and Bing were traditionally search engines that would just show you web pages. But as they began to crawl more and more content like images and videos and news results, and even as more sites began to create content like that, it became kind of more of a mixed dynamic search result. And it gave users the ability to choose between all different types of content types. And this really helped set the way for content marketing and the development of a lot of this type of content because search results created this additional path that users could find these videos or images or maps or locations, whatever it may be. Let me go back for just a second to give you more context into this image because if you're looking at this later offline, it may be a bit confusing. So traditionally, the search results were these individual items. So you had web results and then you had a different tab in Google for video and images. You can kind of see that here in the screenshot on the top right. You can see web and video. Well, these were all different tabs, so you'd have to navigate your way into it. So Google began the test of mixing in your standard default web search a variety of these different pieces of content just to see if people would engage more. And that's how you got these search results, which appear to be more universal in the sense that they're more dynamic. They're more mix between content types. For a short while in 2008 or so, Google began to test personalized search results. Now, a lot of the search results today are powered by a new kind of component of Google's algorithm, which is called RankBrain. And it's essentially machine learning and algorithm, basically intelligence, to find out exactly how people interact with certain search result pages on a query level. And this is giving us a whole wealth of information in terms of what's rich and relevant for one person may be different from the other, and how that's being basically separated is through the queries. Now, for a while, though, Google was personalizing based off of your individual login information. So your search history and pages that you went to, and basically a classification system like that. But they quickly realized that that wasn't a long-term strategy, and a lot of the search results, click-through rates, and people clicking on ads suffered, so they reverted back to a traditional system. Now, social was something that was kind of at the forefront of testing in 2010 for many search engines, where Google began to include icons of kind of the profile picture of influencers to see if that would help drive more clicks on certain search results. But a lot of the testing proved that that actually hurt the search experience, created a bit of biasness to the sites that had these elements properly tagged. It wasn't truly the best generic and anonymous representation of web pages. Best for user experience. Bing, though, did a kind of more intense type connection with social data by actually integrating a lot of their search results with their connectivity with Facebook, and there was a lot of data sharing between the two. So you wouldn't even need to type in something that would relate to social. You could just type in a generic query and it would pull in that social information, and it certainly helped the user experience for those folks that had friends or relatives or anyone that's part of your social circle that had keywords in their profiles that related to these topics, and it can certainly help lead to a richer experience. Google Plus is something many say of the past. It's still around. There's still some activity, but what was interesting is Google's kind of weighing of the plus ones in terms of organic search results. So many sites that would get a +1 or kind of an upvote from users would essentially favor a bit better in search results. Now, it's not a direct correlation, but there certainly was connectivity to this, and this is a way that Google tried to test users contributing to the algorithm and kind of more of a manual type crowdsourcing kind of ranking factor, if you will. Rich snippets then came on the scene in about 2010, and this is where it got really interesting because this is kind of the first kind of real impact that structured data had in SEO. And structured data is basically kind of the vocabulary that's added to code. A web page's HTML code to help search engines understand what it truly means. And it helps them understand what a star rating system is, or what a comment is, or what a breadcrumb navigation looks like. And all these elements really help these search snippets pop out on search results. Now, your traditional search snippet is basically your title line, which is here in blue, and then your description line, which is here below in this black text. Now, this is just a short description that gives the user an idea what the page is about, but these two elements now the display URL was always here as well too. But then Google began to test these breadcrumb features, which kind of give you a sense of the navigation path of the site, breadcrumb, element of a page, and then the star rating system. This is what truly allows us to be called a rich snippet, which is basically kind of a amped up snippet itself with more elements to look at. But what was really interesting with this is that sites that ranked lower in the search results traditionally got a lower click-through rate. But as they started to get rich snippets, they would visually pop out more than other results that were higher above them. So they would actually start to earn a bit of a higher click-through rate than a top-ranking site. So it was a great way to make the most of a position that you had. You could be ranking 9 and have a stronger click-through rate than the number 2 position, because on a page that's just full of blue links, everything looks the same. This helps that result pop out more, draws more attention, more clicks. Authorships came on the scene in about 2011, Google testing the impact that an author image could have. Now, this was a great way for Google to get a lot of sites to essentially mark up and connect to Google+. There's a lot of reasons why Google may have done this because of Google+ and the connectivity and their ability to understand the structured component of authorship and influencers. And it worked really well. A lot of authors did add this to basically their optimization strategy so that their images would appear in search results. And you can clearly see that the image pops out, and same thing with rich snippets. It really helps that particular search result pop out more than the other ones. And today we're really in this hybrid mess. I mean, it's really all over the place. There's so many different components to search results, whether it's a combination of knowledge graph and answer boxes. Like if you type in a question into Google across many queries, Google will try to answer it with their own response. Or on the right-hand side, you may get what's called the knowledge graph, or all these different tiles that essentially it's Google trying to provide the information for you. Now, that can present a lot of great value for sites that have the answer to these questions, but if you'll notice, in many cases, Google is the component or the entity that has the answer. So a lot of this is really there to solve your need, but then to get you to search again, or then to refine your search into another site. And today, now this is something that Moz, one of the bloggers for Moz is a pretty good site on the web in terms of SEO knowledge and tools. They have really good information that they publish regularly. As you get more into an advanced mode, you may find that the information is a bit rudimentary for your needs, but nonetheless, I think there's still a lot of value with the tools, technology, and especially if you're starting out, that is a great place to go. Now, they did a blog post of all the different elements of a search result page. I think the links should still work here. Let me know if it doesn't. But these are all the different types of search results that are essentially possible. So you truly do see this universal nature in search results, and it's come a long way. It's really a mix between all these different types of snippets. Now, here's what's interesting about this. Now, besides being more valuable to the user and being a risk to websites, because if traditionally you were in the number one position, getting X percentage of clicks or X clicks on a very popular query, I mean, imagine you're in the number one position, and on average there you should be getting about 20% of all the organic clicks for a keyword that is searched, let's say, 200,000 times a month. That's a fair amount of traffic that's coming to your site on just one keyword. But if the search result pages change and now you have all these components or a mix between these, or even one of these, now that traffic is at risk. Whether it's going to Google or Google is answering the question that you once answered on your page, all that's really changing. But the interesting thing here is, as Google tests more and more of search results with these universal components, they present ranking opportunity, because maybe all you need to do is optimize an image or a video or a particular element of a page to actually rank higher. For example, let's say it's this traditional search results. It's got 10 listings on there in the organic side, but Google changes it, and now they have these, let's say this image pack here under F. You have all these tiles of images. Well, maybe it's impossible for your site to rank in the top 10 for that particular query with just a regular web page. But maybe you realize that most of those web pages that rank really well don't have optimized images. So maybe that could be your strategy to rank and to get visibility on the first page, is by being first to optimize your images with alt attributes and through other optimizations for images that primarily feed image results. So it can be a shortcut into search results if you're seeing an opportunity there that the competition's not doing. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how Google works. Now, Google has a lot of information on how they work, and I do recommend you spend most of your time there. But a couple of things. Now, Google is massive. Now, this number's changed dramatically since this was created, but essentially most of all the searches that are happening every single day are happening on Google. And it's across the board in terms of what people are searching for. Matt Cutts, formerly in the quality team at Google, did this great video that explains real basically how Google works. It's kind of a classic. It does a rudimentary job of explaining, but I think it's important to watch it and to understand the way he explains it. Now, Google also has more information on this. I'll show you some visuals here in a second. But I think to take a step back and just understand how Google works, basically you need to understand that Google sends spiders or crawlers. And what these basically are these automated computer programs that go out and fetch web pages. And they find these web pages through links, and then they crawl the pages on those links, and they just keep spidering. And again, the video on the previous slide will explain this a lot clearer. But these automated programs are essentially out there to find web pages and catalog them into a central database. Now, there are the traditional spiders for regular search. Then there's also for different devices. There's also for different categories like news or images or videos. And there's also malicious or rogue spiders that are meant to scrape or copy sites. So you have to be very careful that you're telling search engines which pages you can crawl, and specifically telling the bad search engines or the crawling or scraping or copying malicious search engines that they shouldn't be allowed to access your site. And that's mostly done through a robots.txt or some type of HTML snippet. And there's a link at the bottom of that slide that will explain all the malicious bots, things to be aware of. But so let's take a step further. We now understand that there's bots, these software programs that are out there that really crawl the web. It groups everything together. But how Google works at a very general sense is that they crawl the web, they find pages, they index them into a central repository, then they apply a formula, and then they rank them. So let me use an example for a second. Imagine this mega library, billions of books, okay? And you walk into this library, you go to the front door, and you have a couple of books in your hands that you want to donate to the library. So the librarian comes and says, okay, thank you for the books, and begins to flip through them. That's basically the crawling process of Google. Google in this case is the librarian. So they're crawling, they're flipping through the book, they're trying to understand what the book is about, they're looking at the title, the table of content, the references, the sources, etc. And it's getting a contextual understanding of what the book is about. And then they index it. And indexing is based off of crawling, because when they crawl it and understand what the book is about, they know then where to place it. So they know, oh, this is a book about XYZ topic. This would be great in aisle 4, column 6, maybe third shelf from the top. They'll have a pretty good idea of where this fits. Now, bigger books or books that are cited by other sources, these tend to all factor into indexation and where Google places this. Now, keep in mind the top shelf may be harder to reach than the bottom shelf. So this is all factoring in, and where Google indexes a page is really important. Besides just understanding that Google will index a page, it's also important to understand where they index. And then next, Google applies an algorithm or a formula. And this is basically a mathematical equation that looks at a variety of different ranking signals or components. And again, the videos in this link here will show you exactly how, well, it won't tell you exactly, but it'll give you an idea of how they're doing this and why they're doing this. And then lastly, they rank. So the algorithm says, that book that just came in about supervolcanoes, that's actually probably the best book that we have in our library for that topic. So if someone comes in and asks for a book on supervolcanoes, that's the number one book to give them. And they do that by looking again at citations, how many other books source or cite that particular book, the authority of it, how long it's been around, how in-depth it is, the breadth of topics that it covers, etc. So one thing to understand as we kind of dive deeper into the technical side of this is that search engines and users see something different. So as a user, we see a web page in all its glory. It has the CSS, cascading style sheets, and JavaScript, and all the components that make it pretty. It makes it visually attractive and aesthetic, and it all brings it together into a nice view. Now, this is probably a terrible example because it's a very bad-looking website from a few years ago, but on the right-hand side is essentially what search engines are looking at, and they're looking at the raw HTML version of web pages. Now, they can see source code, so all the other components beyond just HTML, and Google in particular has come a very long way in terms of what they can crawl and access in terms of a web page. So this is really, Google can see most components of a web page, and so can Bing and the other search engines. But they don't spend a whole lot of time looking at those components because it takes time and energy for them to do so. So they mostly look at HTML and just regular raw text in a web page. So that's why things like a title tag or description can still be an important factor when it comes to optimizing a web page. Specifically, a body text, the core chunk of text of a page, image alt attributes, all that's seen through the source code. Now, a couple of things to note. Now, first of all, before we go into source code, whenever you're in a browser, most browsers, Safari, I believe, will do this. Chrome, Firefox definitely will. And IE is by right-clicking on the web page itself, let it load fully, then right-click and go to View Page Source. And basically, this will show you the source code or the raw HTML, CSS, JavaScript version of the web page. Kind of shows you this code-heavy version of it, and this is essentially what Google's looking at when they're crawling a web page. Now, they can see all the visual components and the libraries of which code is pulling from, but they don't tend to spend a lot of time there. They're looking at these raw HTML versions. Now, this can be really confusing if you're not a programmer or a designer, so I like to keep this as simple as possible and just point you into certain categories of components of a source code. Now, first thing is if you just do a Control-Find, Control-F on the source code page, and just type in title, you should be pointed to the page's title tag. And you can see it by the brackets, and then there's a closed bracket at the end here, and this is essentially the snippet for the title. Now, this is generally the title that appears in the search result as well, and this is an important factor. Now, there's mixed reviews in terms of the impact that this can have in search results, but at the end of the day, this is still what's populating on the search results. So this can still make a big difference whether or not someone clicks on your listing or whether they don't. And same thing goes for the meta description. And the meta description, if you just search for name equals quote description quote, this should populate that field. Now, on some pages that have really long source code, you may want to use this Control-Find shortcut. It's going to make it a lot easier to find these snippets. Now, when you see these brackets, it essentially means that there are no fields or there is no text for these elements. So that can be a problem, and then it leaves it up to interpretation for the search engines to fill that in. And it may not be your best facing text, and that could be why the pages rank well, but they don't have good click-through rate. Elements like meta keywords, it's something important to look at, but it plays a very, very little role in terms of ranking factor. Google's specifically come out and said it plays no role in ranking factors. Some argue that Bing and some third, fourth tier search engines still look at meta keyword fields. Some argue that you're showing your competitors your target keywords. I mean, the argument against that is SEMrush or some of these tools will show you your competitor that intelligence in a lot more detail. So it doesn't, they'll find it. So a couple more things here. Open graph tag. So this is something that's come out in terms of optimizing social media components. And when you're sharing a page on Facebook, you can optimize the image, the title, the description of what's being shared. There was some connectivity with that in search results in terms of a ranking factor, but it plays very little now. I do like to look at it, though, just to make sure that the social team is aware that these fields can be optimized. And it does make sharing and the effectiveness of sharing a lot more powerful. And then you have JavaScript and CSS. I don't specifically spend a whole lot of time there. This is actually the last item here in the list. I'll skip through this pretty quickly, and we'll then talk about headings. But JavaScript and CSS, it's typically the more you see of this, the longer it can take the page to load, or maybe the more confusing it becomes to search engines. Again, they will look at this. They can crawl through JavaScript and most of these elements. Google's a pretty sophisticated kind of code-based crawler, but at the end of the day, they're really facing a challenge when it comes to efficiency of resources. So they'll generally skip over. You definitely don't want to have keywords or rich content embedded within JavaScript or images or CSS. While they can get to it, they probably won't. And last but not least, with headings, headings they go from H1 to H6. H is a reference to heading, and you basically have an H1, H2, H3, or you could have an H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now they diminish in terms of value, so H6 is the weakest tag, H1 is the strongest in the mind of SEO because typically these are paragraph heading tags, and as you get to X6, you're basically indenting every time. So it's like a subtopic of a subtopic of a subtopic of a subtopic, etc. So your H1 is the starting point. It's your main paragraph tag, and this is typically a very important field to include target keywords, because Google is looking at these fields for contextual kind of mapping of what the page is about. Now, mentioning a phrase on a page is important, but in certain fields it's even more important, and relating one field to the other field is even more important. So having a keyword in a title tag and a heading tag, they can support one another, and it can add much greater power to the overall emphasis of the page or its contextual relevancy. So you definitely want to include keywords on pages, but also in the particular fields that are going to make the most impact. Sorry, let me go back one slide real quick here. Okay, so a couple more things you'll want to check for when you're looking at source code. Control F, type in some of these terms, and you'll find these elements on the page. We'll talk about canonical. We'll talk about rel equals next, no index, alt attributes, etc. And these open brackets, or these kind of no space brackets, which basically indicate no content. These are just additional things you'll want to search for when you're looking at source code to find some problems with the site. A couple more things in terms of how Google works. You definitely want to keep in mind that Google does crawl through a lot of different web components. So Word documents, PDFs, things like that can easily be crawled by Google. They've also expanded this out dramatically to other types of content. So if you want to block something to search engines, you have to take a very, very aggressive set of actions to make sure that they're not looking at those types of elements. So just keep that in mind. Naturally, Google is not blocking it based off of technical capability. So if something's in JavaScript, it still may be indexed. So you'll specifically want to call out something that you want to block. If you're a software company and you have registration keys, or if you have a specific URL for users only, or content behind a paywall, or behind some type of registration window, you definitely want to make sure all those URLs are blocked, or those directories or subdirectories are blocked. Okay, so looking at a couple more things, I want to talk about something in particular. This is more of an in-depth strategy, but if you look here at the top left, you see a column for clicks, page type, and link juice. So clicks is essentially 0 is your home page. So there's no clicks to get to the home page, because typically that's the very top page in the web hierarchy. Like the way a website is set up, it's typically set up like a pyramid. You start with your home page, and then you have your navigation, and then you have your secondary, tertiary, etc. navigation as you work your way down. And that's evident in most sites, because if you just look here at these heads of these sites, you see these top-level navigation bars or these sub-navigation menus. That's just a clear indication that there's a pyramid or a hierarchy to these websites. That's top-bottom. They basically start small and expand. So 0 clicks to get to the home page. That really means that as you're moving into kind of secondary, tertiary, etc. sections of the site, topic pages, category pages, and then you go into subcategory pages, and then article detail pages or product detail pages, you're getting deeper into the site. It's taking more clicks to get back to your most valuable page, which is your home page. So what ends up happening is that the value that these pages get as you go deeper and deeper and deeper into your site is less and less. And that's because your most valuable page, for the most part, is your home page. That's where the majority of the links, the highest value links, are coming in. And remember, Google started with an algorithm that was called PageRank, which essentially was a link-based algorithm that factored in the quantity and quality of links back to a site. And that's still part of the algorithm today. So links coming back to a site is still an important factor. So my point in this is that when you have a site and you start adding more and more pages, the question always ends up being, well, why don't these new pages rank well? And it's because of the hierarchy of the site. They typically fall deeper and lower into a site's hierarchy. And if you don't use internal links correctly, these pages won't ever build up enough authority on their own. So they need the support of these higher up pages or these category pages. So we'll get into this in a lot more detail later on. To be honest, I think this is a misplaced slide, because it should be further and deeper into the process. But it does kind of give us an idea, a chance to talk about internal links and the importance of links for Google. But the hierarchy and the way that you're setting up your site is really important. So if you have a WordPress site, internal links and how you tag pages, it's going to play a critical part. Okay, so let's talk about ranking signals. So, again, how Google works. It's looking at a variety of different signals. Now, this all has really changed with Rank Brain, which is kind of this new component to the algorithm itself, which is looking at machine learning and user behavior in terms of ranking. So, there are still signals, there are still other components that Google is looking at. A lot of this is quickly changing, though, but it's important to understand the kind of the foundation to this. And the foundation to search has always been that there's certain things that Google looks at that tells them whether or not a page is more valuable or less valuable than other pages that are also highly classified for that particular or highly categorized for that particular query. A page on the web is typically around a specific topic, or it's about a specific term or phrase. Now, obviously, many pages are focused around a variety of different phrases. But ideally, for a search engine, it'll be more of a one-to-one matching where you have a page and it's focused around a specific term or specific phrase. And that's ultimately what's going to help a page rank better if it's more contextually themed around a specific and central theme, which matches what people are searching for. But again, the very general thought here is that there's these different ranking factors that are essentially factoring into whether or not a page is a strong or weak page in terms of ranking, and stronger pages tend to rank better. So when we're trying to optimize a particular page around, let's say, French desserts, and we don't rank well, we need to understand how we fare against some of these factors. Do we have a newer site? Do we have any links coming into this particular page? Are we mentioning these target keywords like French desserts or French pastries or creme brulee on the page itself? Do we have a connection between those keywords in certain fields like the heading and the title tag? And are we properly managing the technical side of the site? Maybe it takes 20 seconds to load, and it's just causing a lot of issues for Google. So even though you're using the keywords properly, it's just a technical mess, and it's just not going to favor well in Google's technical algorithm. So those are all components that need to be understood. Now there's hundreds of them. Some say 200, some say 800, some say thousands. Ultimately, again, that's changing based off of Rank Brain, which is now beginning to understand more of performance and what happens when people click on a result, and also have other people clicked on this before, or is there a connectivity between these pages, etc. All these factors may diminish over time, but still today, if you enter the SEO world, you should be familiar with these factors. Okay, so we talked about ranking signals. There's a variety of different things, but I want to bring this back to a very simple kind of context, and that's that there's these four categories essentially of ranking signals. You have your technical signals, which are code-based. We're talking about HTML, link attributes, etc. It's basically everything you see in your source code. And then we're talking about content factors, and this can be the use of keywords, etc. Link factors are, again, the use of links in terms of a page, or if a page is getting links from external sources, or if a page is linking to an external source. It's really how pages are connected to one another on the site itself and also with the rest of the web. And then lastly, social components. And social factors used to be a lot more prominent, a lot more beneficial. Today it's dwindled down quite a bit, but it's still an area to look for. It's still something where a lot of teams are beginning to collaborate when creating content. They're looking at SEO, they're looking at social factors and all these other things like we talked about with open graph tags. So really, let's just break it down into these four categories to simplify it, and within each of these are a variety of different ranking factors. Okay, so now we're going to talk about algorithm changes. Now, Google used to change their algorithm every 90 or so days. There wasn't an exact science to this or an exact calendar, but in observation, they were making tweaks, or they were aggressively testing changes to the search result pages every 90 or so days. They normally do this to test quality of the search results. They want to keep things fresh. Again, keep in mind, if the results are bad, people will stop using search engines, and that'll affect 90% of Google's revenue, which comes from search revenue, search advertising revenue, those paid ads. There's a variety of different ranking signals that at any given point in time, as there's an algorithm change happening, will be more or less affected than the other ones. Again, everything is a weighted it's based on a weighted average, and there's different weights that are given to every signal. And every time there's a change to the algorithm, essentially these weights are adjusted either positively or negatively to provide the best mix that maximizes the search results. There's a variety of things that are looked at. We talked about PageRank. This is based off the number of inbound links and quality of those links. It's also based off other factors that are not just inbound links. PageRank algorithm looks at internal links, external links, and a variety of other components of links themselves, like how they're encoded onto a page, etc. Google made over 500 changes the last time. About 2015, they were making 500 or so changes every algorithm change. That number's gone up, but it's also changed dramatically. So they went up to about 800 or 900 the last time they reported on the number of changes that they made, the last major algorithm update. Then Hummingbird came out, and it kind of essentially wiped away the number of changes that they were making. They just overhauled the entire engine instead of making 100 wrench turns to the motor and adjusting a variety of different components. Now they were making major changes and overhauls. And essentially, as they're making these changes, speed is a really critical factor. And speed and mobile friendliness has played a more and more important role. So speed is critical. And, on average, people ask, how fast should a web page load? And on average, 3 or less seconds, but I would essentially say 3 seconds is too slow. You want to aim more towards that 1 second or 1.5 seconds. And there's many studies that will show the impact to not just search results, but to sales that slower web pages can have. There's a lot of information that you can find on the web in terms of Google algorithm change histories. Check out some of these links. They'll give you an up-to-date list of what's been changed recently. Now I want to talk a little bit about query deserves freshness or QDF algorithm, because on many queries Google will change based off of current events and things that are happening. And one example that I like to use is around the time of Michael Jackson's death. And Michael Jackson was a popular query before the announcement of his death, and Google saw a lot of activity and would show you his albums and his official page and his tour dates and information about him at the time. But then at a point in time when the death announcement was official, Google saw a major uptick in the number of blogs, the number of news articles, and the number of searches that were happening around this name. And essentially what happens is Google essentially changes the way that they show search results, something that they traditionally called QDF, or Query Deserves Freshness, which basically says this query is a trending topic or it's breaking news and it needs fresher results. So essentially what Google does is they then change the search results and fresh content gets boosted. And that's where you start getting like the latest news articles, or Google showing more images or videos or tweets or social elements that are fresh, that are relevant to whatever is the breaking news on that particular query. And this is important to always stay on top of, because there could be a query that, what we call the blockbuster query, the query that drives the most value, the most traffic, the most revenue. And at some point in time, the search result could change for that query if that query slips into a QDF, basically meaning that something around that query changed. So it could be a search for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you're getting traffic, you're ranking well, but then something happens around a news event and the search results change, and that can dramatically change the traffic that you were getting from that keyword. So now I want to talk about SEO, because we talked about search engines and all the components to it, and we know that Google grew into this very large search engine. Many people use it. There's a lot of value of being number one in Google and being at the top of the search results for many queries. But there's this art and science behind it, which is basically the practice of SEO. And basically what search engine optimization is, it's the process of making a web page visible to Google, and to not just make the web page visible, but also show the search engine crawlers that this is the best page on the web for this particular query. Now again, if you adapt this mentality that a page should be about a central query, or maybe a couple of words that are very closely related to one another, kind of create this one-to-one relationship between keywords and pages. And this is ideally what makes crawling and indexing a lot easier for Google, because they can now classify what a page is about a lot faster and a lot more efficiently. So this is a strong basis to ranking well, is to simplify the thematic content of every page and try not to group topics to one another, and try to make the pages around a centralized topic and make that use of those keywords on the page. But essentially, if search engines can find your pages, and if they see that they're relevant, they have links, they're popular pages, people interact with them favorably, these are all components that should earn your way to the top of the search results, which is where the majority of the clicks are happening. Again, this is traffic to your site, more traffic to your site. It's free traffic to your site. And generally, searchers are people that are showing interest in these keywords. They're looking for information. So it's not just general traffic, it's high interest traffic, and it's free. So there's a lot of different ways to refer to SEO. There's search engine optimization or natural search optimization, NSO. Some agencies and people refer to it that way. There's also this growing trend in app store optimization, which is essentially getting your app to appear higher in the app store, which is referred to as APO or ASO as well too. More commonly it's ASO, but there's a variety of different acronyms used. A couple more things about SEO. I think oftentimes it's an afterthought. A lot of folks believe that they can do it later, or that launching a new site or replatforming a new site, SEO is something that's not important. But what they often forget is that SEO was already there and there was traffic coming into the site, and you have to protect that traffic, and you have to make sure you're building something that's going to bring in more traffic, but also that you're protecting the traffic that was there. So it can be a very difficult conversation when replatforming or redesigning a website if SEO is not top of mind and it's not something most folks are looking at. Unfortunately, over the past 5-6 years, a lot of folks have realized the hard way that it needs to be at the very forefront of any type of web development project. Many different types of definitions to this. Find the one that you resonate the most with, that's accurate. Also, there's this art to SEO that I would classify like a malicious art form, or kind of unethical tactics, and there's a lot of content out there that you'll find that's misleading or inaccurate. Fortunately, most of that's dated back pre-2006, pre-2007. A lot of the new kind of concentration and attention that was given to this as a job and a responsibility in the company helped make SEO more ethical, more of a true kind of optimization strategy, not just a way to tweak a page or hide text, or kind of trick the search engines to believing that the page is around something, or stuffing keywords in a page and then changing the background color to the same color as the text itself so you can't see it. Excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. So a lot of information you'll find, find the right definition that fits with you. But in essence, SEO is really about having that one-to-one match between pages and the keywords that they're trying to rank for, or that one phrase that they're trying to rank for. It's that one-to-one relationship. But even if you have a very specific topic in your pages about something very specific, making it easier for the search engines to find it and contextually index it, you need to have a fast page. It needs to be optimized from a code structure. It needs to be very clean, very light, very easy for the search engines to parse through everything and see the rich text that you have, and not spend a lot of time on clunky code or elements that don't don't improve or attribute to a better user experience. You have to have good content. Good content, a lot of pages were created for SEO purposes and kind of give it a bad name because a lot of folks just tried to kind of half-ass their way to search results and try to rank for keywords by putting a couple of blocks of text on a page, and it just wasn't enough. So think of content from the sense of a user. If you're trying to rank a page for, what are the best refrigerators for a trailer home, think about the user, think about spacing, think about weather, think about location, think about all the different components that could be really valuable. And then think of presentation of content, an infographic or a nice design page that has graphic and arrows and this really valuable information that can be downloaded. That may be a really valuable source of content for that user, and that'll lead to more links, it'll lead to more distribution and sharing, and that essentially will drive more and better search results. And then last but not least, it's worth repeating, the clicks from Google are not paid in terms of organic search. It's all algorithmically shown. So it's It's a matter of favoring well with their algorithms and meeting the requirements that they have of top ranking sites. Now, SEO by practice, it's considered one of the most effective digital marketing strategies for leads and conversions, whether it's direct response or even e-commerce. It works incredibly well. It also works as well for traffic acquisitions, for publishing sites that are looking to maximize ad revenue. This can be a really great way to drive more traffic to the site by ranking for more and more of these current keywords. The best SEOs tend to have a thorough understanding about web development and web design. Now, not an in-depth understanding where they are experts in the field, but they understand the basis of these codes and these elements and how they factor into the marketing side of things. And they understand that, when it comes to page speed, this is the code, or these are the elements, like a very heavy image file that can be compressed. These are the things that could factor in, because you ultimately will be communicating with different departments as an SEO, and it's important to have a bit of agreement on the language that's going to be used between these departments. We talked about pages being optimized kind of for 1 or 2 target keywords. I would say if you're going to go for more than one, important to make sure that they're contextually or semantically related, so you don't break that value or the strength of that theme. There are many studies out there. I'll let you guys take a look for some of these updated ones. If you just do a Google image search, just go to the image link at the top of the page. Type in something like the value of SEO and just go to the image link. You'll see a lot of these updated graphs. Or you can type in 2016, 2017, and it'll give you the latest graph for these. Same thing with the heat maps. If you type in SERP heat map and just sort by date, or just type in the date, you'll get some of the latest studies. But basically what these heat maps tell us is that the majority of the traffic or the clicks that happen in the organic results are happening in the number 1, number 2 placement. So when we talk about SEO, it really is about getting to the top of the search results. Now, being at the top will generate clicks and the value that those clicks can turn into, like 50,000 more people coming to a site that sells shoes, 2% converting, that can drive in some revenue. That traffic can quickly turn into revenue just through the law of averages of conversion rate. But it can also mean eyes on advertisement. If you're a publishing site and you want to bring in 100,000 more visits per day or per month to view ads because you're charging on a CPM basis, that can also be valuable to have those 1,000 block of visitors coming in from organic search. The countless other opportunities as well too. We'll talk about real estate. You're pushing down competitors. The more pages you can get to rank for a particular keyword, you begin to quote unquote own the search results for that particular topic. Many companies want to, again, quote unquote own the results. When someone's searching for Florida vacation or for do-it-yourself refrigerator repair, certain brands want to be visible with all their content if they have multiple pieces of content. So you can take up more and more of the real estate, push down the competition, and essentially have a lot more control over that traffic. There's confidence too in brands that rank well in search results. Google is a very favorable and a very strong brand. A lot of people resonate very well with it. It does drive a lot of confidence, whatever they're recommending. So being at the top of the search results is certainly a factor that drives more confidence, especially for new companies that are coming out onto the scene. It's a relatively lower cost of investment. I've seen pay-per-click accounts or Google AdWords accounts that were in the millions of dollars per month that were still driving less traffic than SEO was. And SEO was costing a fraction of that. In some cases, even 1/100th of that cost for more traffic. So it can be very, very powerful if done correctly. And also it's a protective strategy because companies rank really well for their brand terms today, and that may change tomorrow. Google may change something where they want people to not go to your website when they search for your brand, but rather look at a tile that Google has with your brand icon and your brand logo, your brand website reference, etc. So you lose a lot of the control over time as Google begins to make these tests, and it's important to protect that traffic, those branded searches, that audience, by ranking for more and more pages and bring in that traffic through other means. There's a lot of challenges with SEO now, and there's no need for me to go into a lot of detail with the competition. I'm sure it's obvious, but there's millions and millions, in some cases billions of pages that are competing for the top 10, specifically the top 3, number 1, ranking for that particular keyword. So when you rank number 1 or number 2 or number 3, you're essentially outranking all those millions of other web pages that are trying to rank for that term. So it's very competitive, and I mean very competitive. There's also no guarantees on keeping the results that you have today. Things may change dramatically. Google may change their crawling behaviors, their algorithm may change. With RankBrain today, things are changing pretty aggressively as well too. So you do have to push in more and more effort to make sure you maintain the results. In the past, you could have a really strong web page and rank. Now you need to have more and more of a really strong website to make sure you keep that web page's ranking. So it's really the kind of the sum of the total of the pages. Time factor also, some queries are really valuable one month and then they're not the other month. They may get more valuable over time. Vintage wines, we're searching for a 1956 wine. Every year that goes by, that query becomes more and more competitive because the price of the wine goes up. Organizational factors, there could be changes in the company that can make it very difficult. I'll tell you this, for e-commerce sites and for large enterprise websites, it's very challenging at times. Well, let me just put it this way. For most large sites, it's very challenging to make implementations. There's a lot of different moving pieces and a lot of stakeholders that want to have a play in it, and it can make things quite cumbersome and delayed for implementation. I've seen some sites that had a tremendous opportunity lost because it took a year or two to make an implementation, a quite simple implementation. So definitely whatever you can do in terms of proliferation or in terms of communication to help explain the impact, the importance, and relatively low level of effort involved for most of these recommendations, the better, because it's going to make sure that you can get things done quickly, measure the results, and then start to scale. And then, of course, as sites are making major changes, that also plays a critical role with your ability to get things done. This next part, we're going to talk about the fundamental pillar to all of this conversation so far, which is becoming an SEO and really building out the craft of what a search engine optimization professional does, or someone that's interacting with someone that is dedicated to SEO. So the first thing is just to understand the process that you really follow with a career in SEO, and that's essentially to optimize pages and sites. And I think that can get nebulous and it can get very, very complex quickly as you begin to take on the practice, depending on what site you're working on or which sites. But fundamentally, there's three main areas of where optimizations happen on a site. And I'll start with these, and we'll go into more detail with more of a day-to-day process here. But essentially, when you're in SEO, you're doing optimizations on the site. Now, there's on-page optimizations, which are at the page level. So you're making changes to a title, a description, body text, and maybe you're modifying some tech component of that page, looking at source code, changing an attribute on an image, whatever it may be, but it's happening at the page level. And then there's off-page optimizations, which are generally happening outside of your content. And I generally refer to these as changes that you're making to your content, but outside of your site. So maybe it's optimizing a social site. Maybe you're changing your Twitter profile, your Facebook content, or your SlideShare accounts and your information there and how it links back, or how your YouTube video links back to your pages. All those are optimizations that are happening outside of your site, but it's still related to your site's optimization strategy. You're modifying that text and linking it back to your site to help your site rank better. And then there's the site-wide optimizations, which are optimizations that still happen on your site, but it's not to a page level. It's actually across multiple pages. And it's tweaks and changes to tech, content, links, social, all these kind of four pillars of optimizations across the board, across all pages. And these are server-side configurations, redirects, all these kind of core optimizations that happen, but it really affects the entire site. It's not a page-level optimization. So really important to understand that as we go into more detail here, that really the work we're talking about really consists across these three areas. Now, we talked about these four components previously, but to repeat them again, when you're doing optimizations in those three areas, you're doing optimizations across these four categories. So you could do these four optimization categories. You could optimize these four categories at the page level, at the site level, or even offsite level on a third party page. Now, the technical we talked about this really consists of source code. It's how fast pages are loading. It's whether or not search engines can see and crawl through the text content. It's the way that the source code is organized if you're properly using heading tags. It's the way that you're allowing or disallowing a page from being crawled. It's other types of components and best practices. If you're using old code or something technically called deprecated code elements, that could factor in as well too, where search engines are way more modern than your web page. They may have a hard time going back and trying to understand the components and how things were organized and how content is accessible in your page. Maybe there's this old text blocks that you're using that Google stopped following or Bing stopped following 4 years ago. It can make it a lot more difficult for them to see that text. And that's all based around the technical optimizations. Content, again, this is looking at keyword usage on a page level. It's the semantic connection between words. And if you're mentioning different words that are related to one another, how frequency, there's things called keyword proximity and prominence. There's other topics like LDA and LSA. If you type in LSA in SEO or LDA in SEO in Google, you should see some information around this. But it's really the connectivity and the stemming of words, connectivity of words between one word and the other ones, primary, secondary words, etc. Let me just simplify this for a second. You want to rank a web page for a particular phrase. Now, it may just be one word, and maybe 2 words in a phrase, maybe more, etc. But that's your objective. And how you use these keywords really comes down to how competitive it is to rank for these terms. Maybe simply adding a phrase to a page because no one else has that combination of words on a page may be enough to rank and where you want to rank for that. But in other cases, you're going to have to do a lot more. And that's where you start getting into all this other type of clustering and uses of words and more quantity, etc., to really help this stand out. Link optimizations, there's 3 main things to think of here, and we'll go into more details later on this, but it's the internal links that you have, how your own pages are connected to one another. It's inbound links, the links you're receiving from other sites. And it's external links, the links you're giving from your site to external sites. And last but not least, social optimizations. Again, we've talked about how this has diminished and lost its value over time, but it's still important to look at these components. There's, even though Google doesn't report these as ranking signals, or a lot of SEOs are talking about it, even though they're not, it doesn't diminish the impact that it could potentially have in connecting the page's optimization strategy to the social strategy. What I mean by that is, if you're already in source code, if you're making content changes, why not already go ahead and optimize an open graph tag so that when something is tweeted or something is shared on Facebook or something is shared on Instagram, it's already optimized and you can just tackle a better seamless user experience all in one. Maybe the ranking benefits aren't there, but ultimately you want to make them best for your users, the best experience, and having optimized titles and descriptions and images and maybe a carousel of images to share on Facebook is part of that optimization strategy. Now, the SEO process, if you just search for SEO process in Google Images, you'll see how many different approaches there is to this. But essentially, and I'm just going to put this in quotes because this is a very general approach to it. But I will say, over a dozen years or so in this field, this is pretty typical. And even with new clients today, these are millions of URLs, very large websites, brands you're very familiar with, very complex ecosystems of pages, will still follow this process. So I think it's a very still relevant and very general rule of thumb to follow. So before you do the SEO process, kind of stay with me for a second, move to the left of this page, on the left-hand side, tools, time, and talent. These are 3 things that are non-compromisable when you're doing SEO. You have to have tools because if you're working on a site that's more than 10 pages, it's going to get so difficult to keep track of everything that you need tools at your disposal to be able to do things at scale, evaluations at scale, and also track your results through these tools. There's a section of tools we'll get into later, but that's where we'll list out all the different tools, and I'll even go into some detail of how to use the tools. Time is critical because you're not going to accomplish some of the tasks that you need to do in order to get a page to rank for a competitive term in a short amount of time. It can take a lot of collaboration with other departments. There can be stakeholders that have to approve things, and all that's essentially going to factor in. You have to allow for time to get the work done, and then you have to allow time for the results to come in. And if there's anything I can tell you about the results and estimating time, is double what your estimate is originally, and that may be closer to what the actual ends up being. It's just you're working against an uncontrollable, and this is Google and Bing and other search engines, and there's no telling how long they're going to take before they evaluate it. Now, it can be pretty quickly, and in most cases, it is. But there's also many cases where it's not, and it's really important that you don't put yourself in a rough spot of over or underestimating the performance and the results of a particular optimization. Okay, so now let's go to the right-hand side of this. Now, this is essentially meant to be cyclical because it essentially starts with one and it keeps repeating over time. So you start with one, and then once you're done with 8, you kind of repeat this process. Now, in some cases, we'll repeat this process for every single page because every page is targeted for a different keyword, and this is very unique. In some cases, you may want to just do this for a category. If you're an e-commerce site and you're trying to rank for men's shirts, maybe this is the process you follow for ranking for men's shirts, and this is applicable to a group of pages. You know, it really is up to the site, kind of the site strategy, how the site's built out, how many pages you have, and ultimately at the SEO's discretion of how he wants to approach or how she wants to approach this process. But bear with me as a best practice here. We're going to talk about these 8 steps. So we'll go into more detail with this, but I briefly want to cover these. So website analysis is basically your audit. And your audit's going to give you an in-depth look at all the different components, your technical, content, link, social aspect of your site, and the general condition each of those are in. It's also looking at what we know are the top ranking signals. And as an SEO over time, the more you're reading, the more you're studying, you should definitely have test sites where you're experimenting and trying to figure out what are true ranking signals for your industry. And once you start to find those are all factors that play into your audit. And when you're doing an audit, these are the things you're looking at in terms of quality. Are we doing a good job or a bad job at each of these ranking signals? And essentially, what do we need to fix and how do we fix it? That's essentially what the audit is doing. It's uncovering the strengths, weaknesses of the site from an SEO standpoint, and it's creating a marching orders or an action plan of what needs to be fixed timely in terms of prioritization to maximize your results. If we find that most of the site's being blocked by a tag, let's fix that first. Let's only do that. And then let's figure out the results, because that may be all we need to do for accomplishing our particular goals in that period. So the audit's critical. Then client requirements, or the requirements of other stakeholders in your organization. If you're working at the client side, or if you're in-house SEO working for a company doing SEO, or an independent freelance SEO, etc. on your own website, these are your requirements, stakeholder requirements of senior leadership. What are the things that they want to be done? Like, what are their goals? What are their objectives for SEO? Is there a specific number that's being focused on? Is there a particular goal in terms of ranking for XYZ keyword during this time of the year? Whatever those objectives are, that's when you want to analyze them. Now, in some cases, you'll want to put the requirements before the audit, but I tend to want to look at the audit first from a very unbiased standpoint, and I try to look at things from a regular SEO audit standpoint, not from a objective or goal standpoint. I try to look at things that I know are important, things that are going to factor into results that are essentially going to make a big impact to the site. Then I like to study specifically what our goals are. And I try to start with the audit, be as unbiased as possible, and then move into the requirements. Then comes keyword research, which is the study of all the different keywords that you could potentially rank for based on the content that you have. Now, you also want to study keywords that you don't rank for, that you would ideally want to rank for. But I break up keyword research into 2 pieces. Excuse me. Into the keywords we rank for, we just aren't ranking in the top position for, and then second, the keywords we don't rank for at all. So there's either no content for that, or we rank so deep that we're not even on the register in terms of where we're ranking for those keywords. So one is basically improving our results. The other one is getting results in the first place. Then second is the content writing. And this is essentially the process of understanding what content do you need to rank for those keywords. In cases where you're ranking number 2 and you want to jump up to number 1, it could be just a small adjustment to an existing page. In other cases where you're ranking 200 and you want to get to the number 1 position, it could be a very extensive content project on that one particular page to rank for that keyword. And then comes website optimization, the process of actually optimizing against the audit, the findings, implementing the recommendations. Then there's submissions to directories. Many cases, if you're in a very general industry, this won't be much of help. You'll probably want to stay away from directory submissions. But in other B2B industries, there's very valuable directories that do accept submissions from sites. This can be really valuable, universities, etc. And then there's link building and optimizations. Link building, where you're wanting to acquire links from sites. A lot of sites don't know you have the content that you have, and their users could benefit from it. Now, if you don't have great content, link building won't really get you anywhere, and it'll look more kind of malicious than it will valuable. But if you have great content and you're getting the word out there and doing PR and outreach to sites, letting them know you have that, can be a very valuable acquisition channel in terms of getting links back to the site. And ultimately, that can affect your SEO and play a role there. But then there's also link optimizations, which is fixing broken links. Maybe you were getting a great link from the Huffington Post that is now broken because they didn't change the URL that they were once referring to your site, and there's no redirect in place on your site. Now, you want to fix those. If you can control it and you can fix it, maybe there's an old URL that's not redirected, redirect it, fix it. And then that reestablishes that link. Or maybe they removed it on their end and you want them to add it back in. So these are all manual efforts that you do on your end to make sure all your links that were there that you're still earning are proper, that everything's correct, nothing's broken. And also, some sites link to other sites. You may receive a massive amount of links from sites that have nothing to do with your industry. Maybe adult sites, maybe malicious sites, maybe spam sites. Again, nothing to do with your industry, and that could negatively be affecting you. And there's this process called link disavowing, which is essentially going into the search engine consoles. I'll get into more detail with that, but basically these are software programs that you can communicate with search engines with and tell them that you are disavowing your relationship to those sites and you don't want anything to do with them, and it can positively affect your performance because Google then clearly and Bing clearly understand that these aren't links that you've actually gone out and tried to acquire. Excuse me 1 second, let me go back real quick. We missed reporting. And then lastly, reporting, and this is keeping track of everything through tools, through the tools that search engines give you. Also, there's many third-party tools to use as well. You always want to be checking your results. And even as you're doing certain things, like for example, if this whole process takes a year, but you're able to squeeze one of these optimizations through, definitely measure that and the impact that could have, because that could actually free up or make things better across another area. So for example, you have 5 big issues that you're trying to fix. 4 of them can't be done right away. It's going to take some time, but 1 of them can. So you push through and that thing gets implemented and you're checking the results. But then you realize in doing another audit that those other 4 items that are queued up, maybe 1 of them is not needed anymore because the one issue you were able to fix actually fixed that problem already. And that's where you will constantly want to be checking this as you're getting things done. And even over time, there's certain changes that will happen that aren't part of the SEO strategy. Maybe the development team decided to change servers or decided to optimize the back end and technical aspect of the site, and that could benefit you as well. So constantly updating the audit will give you the freshest picture of the condition of the site. Now, when you're doing the web analysis, and we'll go into these in more detail, there's a series of questions to ask for all of these. But let's take a look at some of the more common questions to ask for the web analysis piece. Again, this is the website audit. So we first of all want to look at the consumer journey. We want to look at where does our website fit in the process? Are we the kind of site that you go to after you've already signed up for services? Maybe it's a login type site, like a banking site, typically used for logging in and checking your statements. Maybe that's changed dramatically with mobile banking. What is the nature of our site? Are people coming in to purchase, to get information, to fill out a lead form? Are they coming in, to understand what we're about? Is it truly kind of a brochure nature to our site where we're giving information about our brand? Are we a content hub where we're explaining and trying to kind of demystify this industry or these terms? what is the nature of your site and what does it look like in a consumer path? Like people that are going on the web and finding information around your industry, they're starting somewhere, assuming that they don't know anything about the industry, and then ultimately they're ending somewhere. And that end is typically a conversion or a confirmation page. What does that look like for you? And typically, as you start to do SEO, you start working with other departments and they'll share more information around what they're doing on their end, and then typically that'll uncover a shared consumer journey. It's also important to look at what are the best websites in this industry. Like who's doing a really good job at web design and who has current web standards on their site. I use a site called Built With, and typically we'll type in our nerdydata.com and I'll type in some of the latest standards like an HTML5 snippet or some of the most kind of advanced coding types that are used. It could be new programming languages, it could be new snippets that are used, it could be new elements, something new that these databases and these crawlers will go through and they'll find websites that have these components and I'll study them to see what they're doing on their end. And this could be a really good example of sites to kind of set as the benchmark and eventually get to them. Now, even better if you can find sites that are in your industry and that are competitors that are using these elements as well too. But it's really trying to understand what is best in class in terms of a website development and redesign. Also, is all the tracking set up correctly on our site? Now, this is critical. Now, oftentimes when we're setting goals for SEO and even doing an audit to begin with, we're looking at data that's coming in from analytics, whether it's Google Analytics or whether it's Adobe Site Catalyst or any other analytic tool. We're relying on the data to set the benchmark of where we're at and then where we're going to be going in terms of performance. But as you're setting that benchmark of where you're at, it's critical to make sure that that number is true, that it's accurate, and that you're tracking all pages correctly. I've seen cases where we've been looking at numbers in analytics and found out that only a chunk of the site was actually being tracked. A large portion of the site had no tracking at all. We had no idea whether or not there were any visits to that section of the site. So it's really critical to make sure that everything is proper, set up correctly in Google Analytics and Webmaster Tools and all the other tracking that you're using to set a benchmark and then set a goal. Then you want to understand what the data is telling you about crawling and indexation and ranking performance. So you'll use a tool like Search Console from Google or Bing Webmaster Tools or Google Analytics or SEMrush or Screaming Frog. And you'll use these tools to basically understand how much of your site is being seen by search engines, how you're ranking, what your indexation rates look like, what percentage of your sitemaps are included in Google's indexes. All this information is visible using these tools, but you want to understand, like, what is it telling you about the site? Is it saying that you were a really bad site that got really good, a really slow site that got really fast, or the opposite in all these cases? Were you a really poorly ranked site that started ranking really well? Have you been flat over time, and even worse, over a very long period of time? You know, things on the web change quickly, and Google realizes that. So sites that haven't performed well traditionally in the past may not be a bad thing unless that's been happening for the past 10 years and it's showing no sign of progress. So you want to understand, like, how is it profiling our site? If Google were to have the best site in our category, how would we stack up against that site? And then do we need to fix anything before getting more visits to the site? Now, in some cases, that could be simply your servers don't allow for more visits to the site, or there's a maybe there's a cap to visits that you'll get to quickly if you were to just rank for one of those target keywords. 10,000 more visits may break the servers. You have to look into that first of all and make sure that you have enough capacity on your servers to handle the traffic that you're forecasting. But also, is there anything you need to fix beforehand? Maybe there's something critical with the site that driving more visits to the site would actually hurt. And then likely, where do you get most of your traffic? Is it coming from organic search? Are you paying for it through paid acquisition? And is the site naturally ranking well? Do most people search directly and a very small portion come in through search engines? This is all really critical to start with and understand, do we have a market? Is there an opportunity here with SEO? See, the audit is much more than just finding what's wrong with your site from an SEO standpoint. It's also understanding what role does organic search or SEO play in your entire site kind of admin process or your entire site ecosystem. So second, client requirements, or these could be internal stakeholder requirements. It's what is the goal? What is the number we're trying to hit? Is there a goal for other channels that we can adopt? For us, maybe everyone else is trying to hit 4%. Well, then we can hit 4% as well. Maybe it's double for us because there's less budget, or maybe there's less resources, or maybe there's more resources and more budget, so there's a better expectation for performance. What is the target? Now, I'll be honest with you, in most cases, no one will have this number, and it's really up to you to figure out what your target could be and should be. And what I would do for that is look at where you rank today. So if there's 1,000 keywords in your market, that if you could rank for those 1,000 keywords, you feel like you would have most of the coverage, most of the ownership in that market. Well, what is the sum of those monthly searches? And what's that times 12? And maybe that's 1,000,000 searches. So if we can get into the top 3 position on those keywords, those 1,000 keywords over the course of the year, maybe it's less for your industry as well too. Oftentimes I go into the thousands or 10,000s thinking of these large enterprise sites with millions of URLs, but you may be working with 100 URLs or 1,000 URLs. So what are those keywords that you want to rank for, that you think if you could rank for those keywords, you'd have pretty complete coverage in the industry on the keywords that counted. And then you take that total sum for the year, and then you take what the average click-through rate would be at the top 3 position, and let's just assume right now it's 10%. There's many studies that will show you exactly what it'll be, but it'll be around 10% on average for those top 3 positions. Now, SEMrush will give you this as well too, but let's assume 10%. If you can rank for that million searches for all those keywords, you can rank for 10%. For 10% of all those searches, you'll get traffic. So you take the 10% of the million, and essentially that's what you could be getting back to your site. You divide it by 12, and that's what your target is going to be per month. And then that keeps basically adjusting based off of your target, the keywords that you're looking at in terms of that initial pool. We said 1,000 in this case. You just have to stay on top of that, because every day there's new and new keywords that are being added to it. But just to simplify it, look at those keywords. Even if you have to manually write them down, start with that pool, and that's essentially how you come into that target. And that's where you can set different confidence ratios and say, if we did everything, we'd hit 100% of our goal. If we did half of the stuff, we'd reach 50% of our goal. And you create these different scenarios. What are other key performance indicators that we're measuring on the site? Is time on site, is that an important metric? Is bounce rate an important metric to improve? Are faster pages a sign of success as well? A timeline of reaching the objective is critical as well too. Some of these results may happen sooner than later, in other cases later than sooner. But it's important to be clear that over this period of time you'll be doing XYZ optimizations. You expect things to be done at these stages, and these are the results that you expect over a period of time. You also want to make sure that you're aware of any major changes that are happening in the site, any major redesigns or replatforms. It's really critical, because that could change things pretty dramatically of what you have planned. You do the audit on a current site, but 6 months later it's going to be a completely different site. Well, you better get those optimizations done within those 6 months, probably even less, 3 months, 2 months, right? Next 30 days. Because the new site's already going to start being built, and you want to make sure that you're fixing things and they're not repeating themselves on the new site. Are there any large marketing initiatives happening in the short term? If there's a $40 million brand campaign, you'll probably see more searches for your brand over this period of time. There's so much being pushed around the brand that may affect things. That may make SEO look good and look like you're doing something positive, but it may actually be simulated through more spending and more awareness. Now, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means credit may not be due to you. Maybe due to that increase in budget. Also, understanding what the approval process looks like, how many people need to approve things, what do you need to get approved, is there ways to approve a template, so anything that's approved off of the template will get pushed through automatically. Can you get access directly to publishing? Can you get access to the person that's in charge of publishing? All these things will help facilitate this timeline and not create these roadblocks along the way that you weren't expecting, and then make you look foolish because you have to go back and change your timeline constantly. And then lastly here, what are the editorial guidelines for the site? Even thinking about adding content or making changes to pages, You have to have a general understanding of what's allowed, what's not allowed. Some brands, you just can't say things a certain way, even if users search for those things. You may not ever be able to put that content on the site, and that's very common, and it's okay. You just have to readjust your keyword targets. You won't rank for a term that you have no content for, not normally, but you just adjust. You go for a different set of terms, or you just call out that maybe we would maybe there's 40,000 searches a month for these alcohol related keywords, but we don't want to be associated with that or any negative keywords, so we're not going to go after those terms, and you just call that out in the beginning. Next, keyword research. So as you're diving into the practice of understanding what people are searching for and whether you have content for those keywords, where you rank for those keywords, how much potential traffic is there for those keywords, and whether or not you have an actual page that's dedicated for that, because your homepage may be ranking for hundreds of keywords. None of those words are on the actual homepage, but because the homepage is so valuable from a link standpoint, it's ranking for those terms. Now, that's not a good thing. You want to create a page that's around one of those specific keywords so you can rank better for that term. Or you may keep users on your site longer because now you have a page dedicated to that. Instead of someone doing a search, seeing your homepage, clicking on it, and not seeing the keyword they search for, and then leaving the site. That could hurt you dramatically, especially with rank brain and how it's factoring in short and long clicks. You also want to look at things like, what are the things people are searching for? There's this, we'll get into this in more detail at some point, but there's long tail and short tail keywords. Basically, short tail keywords are shorter phrases or single words, like boats, for example, or yachts. Or it could be a very long tail phrase, which is a longer phrase. And long tail is typically maybe 4, 5, 6, many cases more particular phrase. Like it's a phrase that has 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 keywords that make up the phrase. So maybe it's like a luxury yacht found in this city with this characteristic. Maybe all that's the phrase that someone searched for. That's a long tail keyword. You want to study those and see what's related to your products. Do you sell those very specific products in the long tail, or are you more of a general site around this general topic, etc.? You want to see who ranks for these keywords currently. These are your competitors. Now, it's really important to understand that your web competitors that you see as your brand competitors or web competitors, may be totally different from actually your ranking competitors. Ranking competitors are people that are competing against you. Many brands don't see Wikipedia or even Google as a competitor, but when you start studying the search results and you see that they rank number 2 and then another one ranks number 1 and you rank number 3, these are your competitors that you're trying to outrank to earn your way up to the top. You want to see what kind of content they have. How are they using words differently? How many more words do they have on their page than you have? Are they presenting the content in a cool, fun way that's getting a lot of links and people sharing it? All this is really important in terms of driving a content strategy. It will tell you what Google already likes to see since they're already ranking for those keywords, the same keyword you're trying to rank for. It'll give you a map of what kind of content and how much you need to create. How secure are those sites? Some of these sites just jumped into the number 1 position or into the top 10. Some of these are going to, that maybe the only keyword they have in the top 10. So you want to look at this as well too, because before you start following a strategy, you want to see how valuable these sites are and how much they've earned their way to the top rather than just a temporary jump. Want to see other types of keywords that stem from the words that you're targeting. There may be a very particular keyword you want to go for, or phrase. What other words contextually relate to that? Maybe color, maybe size, maybe day, maybe year, etc. You want to understand that whole kind of ecosystem of how there's a particular keyword and all these different connections of words that are similar to that. How people are searching for these keywords matters. More people coming in December or more people coming in January. Is it very seasonal? Is there a very short window? For Black Friday, are people searching by year, or do they just search for the term Black Friday every year, etc.? You want to understand this dynamic behind these keywords. What states, geographically, maybe some searches are only happening in the specific state. Maybe you want to create content for that type of dialect or for that type of audience or even for that particular city in some cases. You want to see where the majority of searches are coming from in terms of mobile or desktop. And desktop, you may be able to create a 2,000 word article or a 20,000 word article that goes into really great depth, but from a mobile device, it's very unlikely that it'll do well or resonate well. You may want to go more video or picture centric on mobile rather than desktop, where you may want to go more mobile heavy, or excuse me, more text heavy. So as Google moves more and more towards a mobile algorithm, they already have one, but they're moving more towards this mobile first algorithm. That's going to be more and more of a factor in terms of keeping people on your pages longer. You want to create content that's specific by device. Are you currently ranking for any of these keywords? Are the trends showing that this word is increasing or decreasing, or is it flat in terms of popularity? This is all important factors that go into the keyword research. We talked about the long tail. This graphic will give you more idea in terms of the nature of that. I'll let you look at that without taking up your time explaining it. But understand that there's basically three types of keywords. There's branded keywords, keywords that include your brand. There's non-branded keywords. These are keywords that don't include your brand, or any brand for that matter. And then there's competitive keywords. And these are keywords that include your competitors' brands, but not your brands. When creating content, a couple of things you want to consider are, what is the target keyword for this particular page or article, what video or image, whatever it is you're creating. What are the supporting keywords around this? Again, thinking contextually and semantically. Who's the audience we're writing for? The more exact, the better. I mean, is it a younger, older person? Is it a male or female? Is it from this demographic or psychographic? As much information as you can have on this, the better. Many sites have personas and the audience identified. And the more you can understand that, the better it is and the more effective creating new content is. Because not only are you creating content for search engines, but it will resonate better with that audience because you'll be creating it in their tone. What is the emotion you want to get through while someone's reading it? Is it you want to change their state? Do you want to get them, to see the value immediately? Do you want to get them in awe? Do you want to create a sense of happiness, a sense of joy, a sense of kind of empathy, whatever it may be? When you're creating content. Now this is kind of more of a non-SEO related item, but you'll be amazed that by focusing on users, the SEO will come. And I just can't stress that enough. And across the board of metrics, Google has done such a strong job of understanding how people react to search results, and that at the basis of that is the quality of the content and how well it resonates with the audience. So I always tell copywriters, think of the user first, write it like you were going to write it, and let us just influence and be helpful in terms of suggesting terms or ways to organize the content a bit. You also want to focus on creating something very, very valuable. Maybe this is the first time anything like this has ever been written. Maybe it's the best piece of content around this topic on the web. Maybe it's a very unique. Maybe there's millions of other pages that talk about this, but you have a very unique angle to it and it'll make it popular. Those are components that will help you rank in the top 10. Because again, keep in mind you're competing with millions of other sites for these keywords. So you definitely want to have something that's going to push you quickly to the top. Are we adding any pieces to make this stand out? Is there images or videos or infographics or downloads or transcripts? All these different things we can add to content to make it pop out more. Where do we link to other pages on our site? Are we linking to third-party sites? Are we linking to other pages on our site, etc.? And what images, videos, screenshots can we help this? Can we help make our pages stand out more? A couple more things here. I won't go into more detail here. You have it. You can take a look, read through it. But essentially, it's are you adding the keywords into the title, the description, the heading tags? Is it in the authorship or in the open graph tag of social? Again, take these with a grain of salt because some of these have very little value, if any value at this point. There's probably no harm in still having it there. And some of these, you just want to take a look at some of these, especially authorship. I would just do a search for authorship and SEO and just see what the latest is. There's been some recent kind of confusion or new findings around the impact of even having it there in the first place. Images, having alt attributes on the images, having describers like title attributes for those images as well, having URLs that are friendly to search engines, that are clean, that use the hyphen as the delimiter. These are all powerful things that can help rankings. The date on article pages, these are all things that can help the pages stand out more in the search engines as they're evaluating because it gives them more things to evaluate. Then when it comes to the implementation, you want to break this down into the different categories that we talked about: technical, content, link, and social. What are the things that need to be fixed in each of those areas? Because they're typically departments and someone responsible in those departments for these implementations. You also want to see if you can test things in terms of like at a small batch to see if maybe doing a small batch, I don't know, maybe a small test on 1 or 2 pages and then seeing if it works and then applying it to the thousands or hundreds of thousands of other pages. It's a more controlled strategy. So also try to batch these into smaller tests and prove that they work and then scale them. But be careful, because you can prove that something doesn't work on the wrong pages. So if you were to prove that, if you were to test that on other pages, it would work. So make sure that you're using either very random sampling if that's applicable, or you're using normalization, statistical significance in terms of scheduling your test. All that's going to factor in terms of your confidence level of your test and whether or not that's a true representation of scaling. Okay, we're moving quickly. In terms of website submission or directory submissions, some things to think through. There's different channels, some social, some industry-specific blogs and forums and Q&A sites, etc., that could be valuable for submitting your website or a particular page or a particular piece of content. Maybe you come up with a new, really in-depth, couple hundred pages of an FAQ. It's like the best FAQ for your industry. Or you have a table of contents or a glossary, or you come up with something cool like a periodic table of your industry, of financial terms, whatever it may be. And that could be valuable, and that could be something you want to distribute with other sites. And then link building, like what benefits would other sites get from linking to our content? What content do we have to share with other sites? And that's where you want to start with is it's a content inventory. And you may look at 20,000 or 100,000 pages in your site and say these 6 pages is really what we have. And that's fine, because it's not really a quantity game in terms of content. Even though in some industries quantity helps, you'll see some success with even a small number of links. But you want to make sure that they're coming from high quality sites. And if you can find that match between the 6 pieces of content you have and another site that's talking about this but doesn't have a piece of content that relates to it. Like imagine there's a blog out there that talks about New Zealand and the Lord of the Rings movie, but you're a hotel in New Zealand and you create this map, this really awesome visual representation of all the scenes overlaid into a map, and it looks really cool. That blog doesn't have that, and it may want it because it strengthens their own content. That's a great partnership, and that's a great link to get from that site. It's a great relationship to establish. You also want to fix broken links immediately. There's tools out there that'll keep you informed and on alert of any changes that happen there, or you can do a quick audit of all your URLs to find any broken links. And then some sites will eventually get the link wrong, or they may make a change to their pages, or a page that had a link to your site was deleted, therefore the link was deleted. These are all things that you want to stay on top of and reach out to these sites and offer them an alternative or a new URL if you make the change on your end, republish a page, for example, or if you make a redirect change, just informing them that you fixed the issue, etc. In measurement and reporting, it really comes down to what tools are you using. Ultimately, it comes down to what are you reporting on, what are your KPIs, macro, micro KPIs, and what are the best tools to measure those. And also, how do you communicate the results? Data visualization, there's so many tools out there that can show you things a lot clearer than just an Excel spreadsheet can, or even your traditional graphs. So explore those options with D3JS, RFIL, processing, and a variety of different options there. Okay, so I want to talk about this really briefly, and this is more of a teaser into what's coming up later. So we could go into this, but for the sake of time, I want to stop, and I want to just leave what you've just learned with you. I know this has already taken up probably well over an hour of what you've just learned, and I want that to process. I want you to listen through it, get the information, and let it sink in. Now, in another video, I'll probably put this out there for free. I'm not sure. I just need to find the time to be able to put this out there, but I want to know if it's going to be valuable to you. So I'm going to ask that you share in the comments on Udemy, where I'll probably upload this, or any other place where you found this, maybe it's YouTube, that you share in the comments if you would like to see this section built out in core optimizations. So basically what this section is we'll start looking at all the key ranking factors. We talked about ranking factors. We said that it's changing, but we also said it's important to understand the basics of it. Understand this is a critical piece of auditing a site. So we're going to go through all the key ranking factors by categories and each of the components, and we're going to be looking at examples of what it is, why it's important, and a couple of examples of sites that are doing it well or doing it poorly. And this is essentially going to help you understand how to audit a website. So we'll stop with that. We covered a lot of things today. I thank you for your time, for your patience of getting through this. If you've gotten this far, that's fantastic. I think it's going to provide you with a good foundational knowledge of SEO. So again, thanks for your time. Let me know if you want to see more of this, and keep on keeping on. Take care.